One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. So this is a little different. I am actually recording this episode really early in my office, which I never do. It's 5:30 a.m. right now. But the reason while I'm recording so early is because I have been very entrenched for the last few weeks with doing the launch. If you didn't know, my course, Profit Podcasting, was launching, and the doors just closed yesterday, like literally yesterday. And this episode comes out tomorrow. I never record the day of, but it's 5:30 in the morning and I'm still not 100% awake, but I am here because I just had this message that hit me. I had planned to talk about something totally different today for this episode, but since this is fresh on my mind, I was like, no, I got to share this because I think it's really important for all of you podcasters that are brand new. You think that you're going in the right direction, but you're just not sure. Today, I want to talk about not being afraid to test and try new things. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Because if you've been thinking about creating a podcast for a while, well, I'm so glad you found this show. Think of this as the shortcut / time-saving version of searching Google and YouTube for hours and hours trying to figure out the world of podcasting. Trust me, as a busy mama of 3, I get it. You don't have a lot of time to be spent or wasted, I should say, searching the web, trying to find all the right ideas and all the amazing things that are out there, and you just end up overwhelmed. Trust me, I've been there, done that, took home the souvenir. But this podcast is going to help you in practical ways because twice a week we'll be delivering episodes that are going to give you steps to help you create a podcast your audience can't wait to listen to. So let's get right to it, shall we? So what do I mean whenever I say don't be afraid to test and try new things? Well, there are a few things that I've done with my podcast that have really, really paid off. And then there's obviously some things that I've done that were huge lessons learned, right? Because I don't really believe in everything is like a happy mistake, right? So the first thing I wanted to talk about that I want you to consider trying if you are brand new or you are launching a podcast in January or sometime in 2020, there are a few things that I want you to test and just like, don't even worry about it. Don't even worry about the results until you've tested it out for a month, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months. But there are a few ways, like it's almost like the wiggle room that you have in podcasting because it's not cut and dry. It's not a one size fits all approach. If it was, then it would be super boring. And I don't like to listen to boring podcasts. So I'm telling you this to encourage you to be creative and to work with what you have and do what you think your audience wants. If you don't have an audience, or if you do already have an audience, then reach out to them, tell them kind of your game plan, and say, hey, this is what we're going to do for the first few months, and I'd love your feedback. Or, if someone tells you, whoa, that sounds a little crazy, then you say, hey, can we talk about that? But the first thing I want you to consider whenever you're trying and testing things is how often you publish your episodes. So it's so cool, y'all. My mom has the Edible Gardens podcast. And I don't talk a ton about her podcast and all the amazing things that she's done because I never want it to be about me, because everything that she's done has been like total credit goes to her because she works her butt off at what she does. And she has been able to have a top 50 podcast in the home and gardens category, which I think is incredible. I'm so proud of you. So shout out, Mom. You're doing amazing things. But when she first got started, she wanted to publish every day of the week, Monday through Friday. And I was like, Mom, that's super, super ambitious, And I didn't tell her, no, you absolutely cannot do that. But I just kept thinking like, I don't know, like you're brand new to this, how comfortable. These were my doubts in my head. I didn't voice all of my opinions. Because I'm trying to be a good teacher and I wanted to just let her do what she wants to do. And, it's my mom. Like, I'm not going to tell her like, this is what you have to do because that just feels weird. But she did. She started posting 5 episodes every single week. And, I want to say that lasted maybe a month and a half, 2 months. But what was really, really cool about this, and she never would have had this aha moment had she not done 5 episodes every single week, is how quickly it was like that baptism by fire. Like she learned editing super quickly and she learned how to create her content very fast. And she felt more comfortable like behind the mic super, super quickly because in, a month's time, she was already up to 20 episodes. So that's incredible. I told her, I was like, man, I'm so impressed with what you did because it took me, I published my episodes when I very first started once a week for several months. I mean, almost a year, actually. I only published once a week. And I just was like, I told her, I was like, I'm so impressed. And she was like, man, I learned so much. And I'm so glad that I did that because she feels like for one, she had a lot of content that she felt like she was behind. Like she just wanted to play catch up and get all of this content out into the world. She has a saying, it's so funny. She was like, I feel like I'm 11 months pregnant on a hot day in July. And I'm like, well, that sounds miserable. So I hate that you feel that way. But she was saying, I just had all this information that I had to get out. I just wanted it to get out of me. And so that's why she did that at the very beginning. So if you're kind of feeling the same way, you're wondering, how often should I publish? Now she only publishes once a week. But again, she hasn't even been podcasting a year and she's already up to 40 something episodes because she put out so much at the very beginning. So I just want you to know that that is one place where you can experiment. You can publish 15-minute episodes a few times a week, or you could publish one episode that's between 30 minutes to an hour. It totally depends on you and what your bandwidth is, and I guess what kind of the expectations that you have set up for your show and your processes. Like, I wouldn't recommend this to anybody that is going like full force, doing all the show notes, doing like everything themselves, all the marketing, like everything, because you're gonna burn out really quickly if you try to publish 5 days a week. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. I think that you should try and experiment with how often you publish, but if you aren't sure where to get started, then just publish once a week. Just publish once a week, and like don't even mess around with the pressure of trying to publish any more than that. Just start with one episode a week. So that's my first point, is how often to publish. The second point that I want to make, where I believe that you can just don't be afraid to test and try new things, is your show format. So if you go back and listen to very early episodes of this podcast, you will hear a totally different show format than what it is today. And the reason why is because I didn't like it. It didn't feel natural to me whenever I would say certain things. And then now I have a pre-recorded, what I call my podcast main theme, that is pre-recorded, and it's something that I drop into every single track, because I used to say all of that information in every episode, and it just felt weird. It felt awkward. It felt forced for me to say that. And I was like, man, if I can't bring the same consistent energy to what I'm saying in my introduction or, in this pre-recorded segment, then why am I even doing it? Because I don't want my audience to feel like I'm not giving my all if, I'm trying to say it every time, but I'm not bringing the same energy. Maybe I don't feel as great today, or even like this morning, I have a totally different energy. I know my voice probably sounds different because it's 5:40 in the morning, but I want you to play around with your show format. So what does that mean? What does a show format entail? Well, that is what I call the story of your episodes. So you have your intro, which is your beginning. You have the meat of the episode, which is your middle. And then you have the outro, which is the end. So think of it like a story. You have the beginning, the middle, the end. So I feel like you can play around with where you want to drop in your music. You can also play around with where you have the pre-recorded segments. So I know some people have their introduction is pre-recorded. Some people have their outro pre-recorded. Some people have things in the middle. But I feel like you don't have to be married to your show format. Like, once you establish what it is. Now, to be fair, I don't think you should change it up very often. So I've changed my show format maybe 2 or 3 times, and have more than 100 this is episode 108, right? Yeah, 109. This is episode 109. So I want you to just know that it's not something that you should jump around. Like, establish how you're going to have every single episode, at least it be a guideline. That way you have kind of like your North Star. Like, okay, this is what we're going for. I know it's probably not going to be the same way every single time, but this is what we're shooting for. So that is the second place that I want you to try and experiment, have a little fun. Don't be afraid to test things, but try new things with your show format, especially if you've been, at this a while, you've put out a few episodes, and when you sit down to record, something feels forced or it's just not as fun to say. I want you to reevaluate. I want you to think about, why does this feel forced? Because I can say that because that's how I felt. I felt very forced when I would sit down to read my intro, and I was just like, man, it's the same thing every single week, but I can't bring the same amount of energy in the same way every single time. So if that's how you feel, then rethink your show format, sit down and look at it and see where you can improve or where you can make it just a little bit better. So the third thing I want to talk about today, and where I want you to not be afraid to try and test new things, is your calls to action or your self-sponsored ads. So I put an or instead of talking about both of these because maybe you don't have a product, maybe you don't have a service, maybe you are just starting from scratch and you are using your podcast to eventually have a platform to sell something to your audience. If that's the case, then I really, really want you to play around with your calls to action. So there's an entire episode, I'll link to it in the show notes, but it's calls to action for your podcast. And I tell you, I think I cover like 10 that you can, 10 calls to action that you can use within your podcast. But I actually have a free download, and I'll link to it in the show notes, but it's 25 calls to action that you can make from your podcast. So if you're not sure, you're like, Crystal, I don't even know what you're talking about, then go get that freebie. I'm going to put it in the show notes. But so crystalprofit.com/episode 109, that's where you'll find 25 calls to action. But what that is I want you to constantly be asking your audience to do something. And the reason why, the psychology behind it, is you want to engage with them on a level of not just them listening and you talking, but have them join your Facebook group. If you didn't listen to the last episode, I talked all about how a Facebook group can be amazing for your podcast. So if that's all you talk about for a while, that's fine. If you just say, hey, by the way, make sure that you've joined us in our Facebook group where we're continuing this conversation, or where we are talking about this one specific thing on this day of the week. If you have certain, cool things set up in your group, then make sure you tell people about it. How else are they going to know? So that's a call to action. And then you can ask them to subscribe. And this is something I get asked, or I've seen this question asked a lot too, is when should I ask people to subscribe to the show? And honestly, I've done it everywhere, like in the different beginning, middle, and end. And I feel like for me and my audience and this show, I do it at the end. And the reason why is because if someone is brand new, this is the very first time they've ever listened to this show, I don't want them to feel the pressure that you would at the very beginning of an episode. So like if I listen to a brand new podcast and the first thing out of their mouth is make sure that you've subscribed and you left us a review, and it's like a pushy thing, it feels like a sales pitch. It really does. But if I deliver a ton of value and a ton of content to you, and then I ask for you to subscribe, you to leave us a review, then that doesn't feel forced to me. That doesn't feel like I'm, being salesy, being pushy or anything. It feels like the natural next step is to say, hey, if you enjoyed what we're talking about here, then I'd love for you to subscribe. So that's my take on, asking people to subscribe, but you could do it however you want to do it. When I first started, I did it at the beginning, and then slowly I changed it from the very beginning to kind of the middle. Like whenever I was doing an introduction, I was giving someone's bio, because I did a whole lot of interviews in the very beginning. And I would kind of bake it into whenever I said, oh, this is their bio, this is this, and make sure that you subscribe. So I've done it all over the place, but where it feels most natural to me and just, it feels like the next step of the journey is at the end. But that's just my take on it. Like I said, this is where I really want you to experiment and see what feels right for you. But another call to action that you can play around with is having people go to your website if you have a podcast website. And if you don't, there's a training coming up in 2020 where I'm going to walk you through exactly how to set up a podcast website. So that's going to be really fun. And I'm looking forward to that. I'm planning 2020 and all the fun things that are coming up. There's going to be a lot of training going on in 2020 outside of my course. So the course was really created for people to learn how to start, launch, and market, but the trainings that I'm creating for 2020 are kind of beyond that. So it's like, okay, I have this podcast set up, now what kind of thing. And I'm looking at doing monthly trainings that are going to be available, and I'm really excited. I can't wait to have more details to share with you, but it's going to be a lot of fun, and I think you're really going to like it. But that's it. So we talked about how you can not be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared, guys. You're not going to break your podcast if you try something new. And you're not going to get hate emails because you decided to put your, calls to action at the end. Don't worry about it. I promise. Just don't be afraid to test and try new things. Now, with that being said, don't be jumping all over the place, okay? Try something for a month or try something for a quarter. Let's say 3 months is the absolute max, I think. I don't think you should be switching things around way too much. But if you are going to try something, try to do it at least once a quarter. Now, if you are doing calls to action, I think that those can be switched out at least every month. Don't switch your calls to action around all over the place. At least keep a few of them consistent. Like for me, for this podcast, I have people, I want you to go check out the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 109. I want you to give us a subscription and give us a review and a rating if you feel so led to. And that's really about it. And then every once in a while, I have a free download or I have the podcast boot camp, but I really want you to have 2 solid calls to action that you use every single episode, and then experiment, then change up from month to month which other things that you want to bake in, whether it's your Facebook group or a download, or you have a live event coming up. It's going to just vary based on what's going on in your business and what's happening for your podcast. So I'm going to do a recap real fast. So we talked about you can test how often you publish. So you want to do 5 days a week, you want to do once a week. Test around with that, play around with it. And I have landed on 2 days a week works amazing because it gets me in front of my audience more often. And it's really helped me grow my listener base and my downloads because I show up more often for my audience and they appreciate that. And then the second thing we talked about is your show format. So you're not married to your show format. If you realize you don't like something, it's okay to change it. Just don't hop around changing it all the time. And then the third thing we talked about are calls to action and self-sponsored ads. I didn't really get too much into self-sponsored ads, only because I didn't want to be confusing, but I will touch on this real fast. So with self-sponsored ads, I changed that up depending on what's going on in my business. So if you've listened to this podcast, you would hear an ad for the masterclass that I recently did. And then you would hear an ad for profit podcasting. And then you would hear an ad for if there's a live event coming up. There's actually an event coming up in the new year that I plan on promoting here on the podcast because I think it would be very valuable to podcasters. So don't be afraid to try new things, guys. Okay? It's all an experiment. You won't really know what you love and what your audience loves until you just get going and start producing your show. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. As I said, if you are brand new to this show, I would love it if you would subscribe and hear the other fun things that we're going to talk about. You can also leave us a rating and a review. You can leave us a rating between 1 to 5 stars, and you can leave a comment and tell us what your biggest takeaway was from this episode. And you can always check out the show notes. Today's episode is at crystalprofit.com/episode 109. And that's all I have for you today, guys. So keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, "Send Crystal a text message." And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, "Send Crystal a text message." And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.